Welcome back, everyone, to the Systemic World podcast.
Glad to be here.
So this is our sixth deep dive, and today we're going to be delving into the work of the one and only Donella Meadows.
Oh, yes. Dana Meadows.
Mhm.
Such a powerful voice in the world of systems thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Still relevant, I think.
Hugely relevant.
Hugely relevant today.
Yeah.
Even though, a lot of her work was done quite a while ago now.
It is. It's remarkable how insightful and prescient her work was and continues to be, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at two pieces of her work today. One is kind of a reflection on her core principles and mindset,
Mm-hmm.
and really, trying to glean what it was that made her such a powerful thinker.
Right.
And then the second piece that we're going to look at is her framework on leverage points for systemic change.
Ah, yes. A framework that's become really foundational in the field, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So our goal today really is to extract that core wisdom from these sources so we can offer you, the listener, a really potent way of looking at the world.
A way of understanding and engaging with the complexity that we're all swimming in, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this first article that we're diving into, it's kind of a fresh perspective on Dana Meadows.
Right.
It goes beyond just the specifics of the limits to growth and that sort of thing.
It almost feels like a personal journey, this article, This author's quest to really grasp what was at the heart of Dana's approach.
Right.
What were those fundamental principles that she was working with? And what was the mindset, the underlying worldview that fueled all those incredible insights?
Yeah. And I love how the author kind of grapples with this question of, what would Dana be thinking about today?
Right. What would she be asking? It's a fascinating thought experiment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, it's clear from this article that for Dana, it wasn't just about, crunching numbers or building models.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely not. It wasn't just about the technical aspects of systems analysis. There was something much deeper going on there.
Right.
Yeah.
It was about how she fundamentally saw the world.
Right. And this article really emphasizes that, doesn't it? That her power was in her ability to see the world not as a collection of isolated parts, but as a deeply interconnected web of relationships.
Yes.
Systems, interwoven systems.
Interwoven system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's in understanding those connections, those interactions, that we begin to grasp why a system behaves the way it does.
Absolutely. And then once you can understand that, then you can figure out, well, how can we influence the system?
Precisely. Yeah.
So the article gives this great example of Dana's fascination with land stewardship.
Oh, yes. And community-supported agriculture. That was a real passion for her.
Yeah. And for her, land was not just a commodity to be owned.
Right. Not just something to be bought and sold and exploited.
Right. But a shared resource.
Something that demanded careful tending, responsible stewardship.
Right. And I think this really compels us to rethink fundamental concepts like ownership and power, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It challenges us to question those deeply ingrained assumptions about who has the right to control and benefit from resources.
Right. And I thought it was fascinating how the author connected this back to Dana's later work on the biochemical basis of organic farming.
Right. It highlights that ability she had to move between the micro and the macro, the intricate details, and the grand systemic overview.
Yeah. It shows that she wasn't afraid to really get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, and to connect those nitty-gritty details back to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And that leads us to that really compelling question the article asks. If Dana were here today, what would she be asking? What would those urgent questions be?
Yeah. I mean, the author brings up some really interesting points, starting with the control of information flows.
Yes. Which feels incredibly relevant in today's world, doesn't it? With the dominance of social media and the internet.
Right. I mean, how is information being controlled? Who's controlling it?
And to what ends? Whose interests are being served by the way information is filtered and disseminated?
Right. And, the article suggests that Dana would be really concerned about how artificial intelligence is shaping our perception of reality.
Absolutely. These algorithms are increasingly determining what we see, what we hear, what we believe. It raises serious questions about whether we even have a shared understanding of truth anymore.
Right. I mean, if everyone's being fed a different version of reality by these algorithms, then how can we possibly have a common ground?
It's a profound challenge, and the article draws a really astute parallel to Dana's earlier work on agriculture.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, she was deeply concerned with who controlled the essential resources in the food system, right?
Right.
Who set the rules of the game and who ultimately benefited. And the article suggests that she would be asking those same questions today about our digital ecosystems.
Oh, wow. That's a really powerful parallel.
It is. It's about understanding the power dynamics inherent in any complex system, whether it's food production or the flow of information online.
Right. So who controls the essential resources in the digital age? Information, data.
Exactly. Who sets the rules? Who designs the algorithms that determine what we see and how we interact online?
And who's profiting from all of this? Who are the winners and losers in this new digital landscape?
It's a critical line of inquiry, and one that Dana, I think, would be pursuing with great rigor and passion.
Yeah. The article also sheds light on some lesser-known aspects of Dana's leadership style.
Oh, yes. And this is something I found particularly insightful. This idea that she was very strategic in how she communicated her ideas.
Oh, yeah. In what way?
Well, she was very conscious of tailoring her message for different audiences.
Oh, interesting.
So she would speak differently to policymakers than she would to academics, for example.
Right. And she also had a way of speaking to the general public that was both engaging and informative.
Exactly. She understood that to create change, you need to meet people where they are and speak in a language that resonates with them.
Right. And I was also really struck by this point the author made about how she always tried to present visions of possibility alongside her warnings.
Yes. She understood the importance of not just highlighting the risks and the dangers, but also painting a picture of a desirable future that we could work towards.
Right. Because if you just focus on the doom and gloom, people are going to feel paralyzed and hopeless.
Exactly. It's demotivating.
Right.
But if you can offer a glimpse of a better world, it can inspire action.
Right. Like the stabilized world scenario in Limits to Growth.
Yes, that's a perfect example. While the book is often remembered for its rather dire predictions, Dana also included a scenario where humanity manages to achieve a sustainable equilibrium.
Right. It shows that she wasn't just a prophet of doom. She genuinely believed in the possibility of positive change.
And I think that's an important message for us to hold on to today, especially when we're confronted with such daunting challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so many of us feel this sense of powerlessness, when we look at what's happening in the world.
Right. Climate change, political polarization, economic inequality, it can feel overwhelming.
Yeah. Like, what can one person possibly do to make a difference?
Right. But Dana's perspective, as articulated in this article, offers a really powerful antidote to that feeling of helplessness.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, she reminds us that we are not external to these systems. We are part of them.
Oh, right.
We are embedded within them.
Yeah,
And that means we have the capacity to influence them from within.
I see. So it's not about waiting for some external authority to come in and fix everything.
No. It's about recognizing our own agency, our own power to shape the systems that shape our lives.
Right. So if we were to ask ourselves, what would Dana do in the face of these challenges, what might the answer be?
Well, the article suggests that she would start with truth-telling.
Okay. But not truth-telling as a weapon to divide people.
Exactly. Not as a way to score points or demonize opponents, but as a foundation for genuine understanding and shared reality.
Right. Because if we can't even agree on what's true, then how can we possibly work together to solve problems?
Precisely. And then she would likely focus on identifying those leverage points.
Those strategic places where a small intervention can have a big impact.
Exactly. Those pressure points where a relatively modest effort can trigger a cascade of positive changes.
Right. And I love this point the article makes about the importance of visioning.
Yes. It's not just about reacting to crises as they emerge, but actively imagining the future we want to create.
Right. It's about proactively shaping the world we want to live in.
Exactly. And I think perhaps most importantly, Dana would emphasize the importance of leading with love.
Really? Love.
Yes. Not love as a sentimental afterthought, but as an integral component of rational thought.
I see. So it's not about choosing between logic and emotion.
No, it's about recognizing that they're both essential for effective systems thinking and change making.
Right. Because ultimately we're all interconnected. What affects one of us affects all of us.
Exactly. And the article ends with this really powerful question for us, the listeners.
Yeah.
What is it?
How can you apply this mindset to the systems that you're a part of?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. It's an invitation to move from passive observer to active participant.
Right. To become a conscious agent of change in your own life and in the world around you.
Precisely.
And that leads us perfectly into our second article for today.
which delves into Dana's framework of leverage points.
Yes, but specifically through the lens of gender equality.
Right. It takes those principles of systemic change and applies them to a really critical issue.
Absolutely. And I love how the article emphasizes that not all actions within a system are equally effective.
Right. Some interventions have a negligible impact, while others can be truly transformative.
Yeah. It's about finding those strategic pressure points.
Those leverage points where a small shift can create a ripple effect throughout the whole system.
Right. So the first example the article looks at is the idea of a policy shift towards equal parental leave. Right. And it draws a really important distinction between this and policies that just focus on maternity leave.
Right, because while maternity leave is important, it can sometimes inadvertently reinforce traditional gender roles.
Exactly. It can send the subtle message that childcare is primarily the mother's responsibility.
Right, and that can have all sorts of knock-on effects.
Absolutely. It can impact women's career trajectories, contribute to the gender pay gap.
Right, because if women are always the ones expected to take time off to care for children, then they're going to be at a disadvantage in the workplace.
Exactly. And
No.
so the article argues that equal parental leave is a much higher leverage intervention.
Okay, I see. Because it starts to redistribute those caregiving responsibilities.
Precisely. It normalizes the idea that men are just as capable of caring for children as women.
Right, and that can have a ripple effect on all sorts of things.
Absolutely. It can reduce workplace bias against women, promote greater gender equality at home.
And it can create this positive feedback loop where more men taking parental leave leads to even greater gender equality.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of how a seemingly small policy change can have a profound systemic impact.
Yeah. And the article calls this a medium to high leverage point.
Right, because it's directly changing the structure of the system.
Okay, so what's the next leverage point they discuss?
Well, the second one is an education shift.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's about the power of teaching systems thinking itself as a tool to address gender bias.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about increasing the representation of women in the curriculum.
Right. That's important, but it's not enough.
Right.
The real leverage point here is equipping students with the critical thinking skills to analyze and understand the systemic nature of bias.
Okay, I see. So it's about helping to see those hidden feedback loops, the underlying mental models that perpetuate inequality.
Exactly. And the article uses the example of the leadership gap.
Right. The fact that there are still far fewer women in leadership positions than men.
Yeah. And this gap is often explained as a result of women's choices or a lack of ambition.
Right. But the article points out that this is a classic example of a reinforcing loop.
Right. Fewer women in leadership leads to fewer role models for younger women, which in turn discourages them from pursuing leadership roles.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. And so by teaching students to see these dynamics, we can empower them to challenge those limiting beliefs and break those cycles.
That's really powerful. And the article classifies this as a high leverage point.
Right, because it's directly addressing those fundamental mental models that shape our perceptions and behaviors.
Okay, so what's the final leverage point they discuss?
Well, the last one is a tech shift.
A tech shift, okay.
Yeah.
What do they mean by that?
Well, it's about rethinking the design of artificial intelligence to reduce bias.
Oh, interesting. So how does AI play into gender equality?
Well, AI systems are often trained on historical data that reflects existing societal biases.
Oh, right. So if the data shows that men are more likely to be hired for leadership roles, then the AI might learn to perpetuate that bias.
Exactly. And that can have really serious consequences.
Right. Because it means that AI could end up reinforcing and amplifying existing inequalities.
Precisely. And so the article argues that simply auditing AI for fairness after the fact is not enough.
Right. It's a bit like closing the stable door after the horse is bolted.
Exactly. The higher leverage approach is to design AI systems that are explicitly anti-bias from the ground up.
Okay, I see. So how do you do that?
Well, one idea is to train AI on simulated data that reflects a more equitable world.
So instead of just learning from past decisions, which might be biased, the AI could be trained on a data set that shows women and men being equally successful in all sorts of roles.
Exactly. And that could help to break those harmful feedback loops and create a more level playing field.
That's a really interesting idea. And the article calls this a high leverage point, too.
Right, because it's about changing the very design of the system.
So it's not just about tweaking things around the edges. It's about fundamentally rethinking how AI is created and used.
Precisely. And I think these examples really illustrate the power of focusing on leverage points.
Yeah. It's not just about working harder, it's about working smarter.
Exactly. It's about finding those strategic places where a small intervention can have a disproportionately large impact.
Right. And as Dana Meadows herself so wisely pointed out, often the most powerful leverage point of all is a shift in the underlying paradigm.
Those deeply held beliefs and assumptions that shape how we see the world.
Right. Because if we can change those fundamental mental models, then everything else starts to shift as well.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave you, the listener, with a question.
A challenge, perhaps.
Yes, a challenge.
Okay, I like it.
What are the leverage points in your own life?
In your work, your relationships, your community.
Where can you apply these principles of systems thinking to create positive change?
What small shifts can you make that might have a ripple effect throughout the whole system?
It's not always easy to see those leverage points.
No, it takes time, reflection, careful observation.
But the rewards can be immense.
Absolutely. Because when we understand how systems work, we can start to nudge them in a more positive direction.
We can become conscious architects of our own destiny.
And that, I think, is a truly empowering thought.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Until then.